The lights dimmed in the xenobiology lecture hall of the Galactic Academy of Sciences. The chamber was designed to accommodate students from across the known universe. Seats adjusted automatically to various physiologies. Atmospheric bubbles catered to different breathing requirements, and temperature zones ranged from near freezing to volcanic heat. In the middle section, surrounded by beings of all shapes, colors, and compositions, sat Tobias Harrow. Tobias appeared unremarkable. Average height, average build, brown hair, and hazel eyes that currently focused on the holographic display at the front of the hall. His only distinguishing feature was the slightly higher gravity setting on his seat, causing the cushion to compress more than those around him. That, and the subtle blue tint of his atmospheric bubble, adjusted to Earth normal oxygen levels. "Today," announced Professor Zaltar, a tall, willowy being with translucent skin through which pulsed an intricate network of bioluminescent veins. "We begin our unit on what the Galactic Federation classifies as Class X planets, commonly known as Deathworlds." A murmur rippled through the hall. Tobias shifted in his seat, trying to appear casual while his heart rate increased slightly. The professor's six-fingered hands manipulated the hologram controls, bringing up a rotating image of a harsh, rocky planet with swirling storm systems covering most of its surface. "Deathworlds," continued Zaltar, "are planets with environmental conditions so extreme that most sentient species would perish within minutes without technological assistance. Yet these worlds have produced some of the most resilient and, frankly, terrifying organisms in our galaxy." The image changed to show a massive creature covered in armor-like plates, with multiple rows of serrated teeth. "The Vraxian bone crusher," Zaltar explained. "Native to Vrax, a planet with 3 times standard gravity and an atmosphere rich in sulfuric compounds. Its exoskeleton can withstand pressures that would crush most spacecraft hulls." More images appeared. Creatures with adaptations ranging from acidic blood to telepathic hunting techniques. What makes Deathworld organisms particularly fascinating and dangerous is their evolutionary adaptations, Zaltar said, pacing across the stage. "Having developed in environments that would kill most sentient beings instantly, they've evolved characteristics that seem almost supernatural to the rest of us." A blue-skinned student with 4 arms raised one of them. "Professor, are there any Deathworlders attending the academy?" Zaltar paused, considering. "A few, though they're rare. The Draconians from Ignitus Prime have 2 representatives in the engineering department. And I believe there's a Chronosian in advanced physics." Tobias sank a little lower in his seat. "But the most infamous Deathworld," Zaltar said, "one that continues to puzzle xenobiologists across the galaxy, is this one." The hologram changed to show a blue-green planet with swirling white cloud formations. Tobias felt his mouth go dry. "Earth. Sol 3, known to its inhabitants as Earth," Zaltar announced. "Seemingly unremarkable at first glance. Moderate gravity, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, temperate climate ranges, yet it has produced some of the most adaptable and resilient organisms we've encountered." The image zoomed in to show various Earth environments, from scorching deserts to frozen tundra, from ocean depths to mountain peaks. What makes Earth particularly unique is its environmental diversity. Most planets have consistent conditions across their habitable regions. Earth, however, features extreme variations. Its inhabitants have evolved to survive in everything from sub-freezing temperatures to scorching heat, from crushing ocean pressures to thin mountain air. Tobias noticed several students glancing his way, though most quickly looked away when they caught his eye. The dominant species, humans. Zaltar continued as an anatomical diagram of a human appeared. Appear unimpressive physically. No natural armor. Limited strength compared to many species. No venom. No extraordinary sensory capabilities. Yet they've survived and thrived in conditions that would kill most sentient species. A student with scaled skin and a crest of feathers raised a hand. But Professor, if they're so unimpressive, why is Earth classified as a death world? An excellent question. Zixatal. Zaltar replied. Earth is not just classified as a death world because of its environmental extremes, but because of its biological hazards. The planet is teeming with microorganisms that cause disease, viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites that have co-evolved with humans for millions of years. The hologram displayed microscopic images of various pathogens. Humans live in a constant state of biological warfare. Their bodies are perpetually fighting off invasions from countless microorganisms. What's remarkable is that they do this unconsciously. Their immune systems have evolved to be constantly vigilant. Another student, this one with tentacle-like appendages instead of arms, spoke up. But surely with their technology, they've overcome these biological threats. To some extent, Zaltar acknowledged. But here's what's fascinating. Humans have incorporated some of these potential pathogens into their own biology. Their digestive systems, for example, host trillions of microorganisms that help them process food. Remove these symbiotic organisms, and humans would struggle to survive. Tobias felt increasingly uncomfortable as the discussion continued. He'd been at the academy for 3 months now, and while he hadn't hidden his Earth origins, he hadn't exactly advertised them either. Moreover, Zaltar continued, Earth's gravity, while not extreme, is higher than average for inhabited worlds. Humans have evolved dense muscle and bone structures to compensate. When they visit lower gravity environments, they exhibit strength that can seem almost supernatural to species from such worlds. A holographic video played showing a human lifting what appeared to be an enormous weight on a low-gravity moon. But perhaps most terrifying is their psychological resilience, Zaltar said, voice lowering dramatically. Humans can endure conditions that would break the minds of most sentient species. They have an almost pathological drive to explore, to push boundaries. They willingly put themselves in danger for reasons that puzzle xenopsychologists, for sport, for adventure, sometimes merely to prove that they can. The professor gestured, and the hologram showed humans engaging in various extreme activities, scaling sheer cliff faces without safety equipment, diving into ocean depths, venturing into caves, and jumping from great heights with only fabric wings to slow their descent. And they can eat almost anything. Zaltar added with a note of disgust. Their digestive systems can process substances that would be toxic to most species. They consume plants containing compounds specifically evolved to deter consumption. They even deliberately eat foods containing capsaicin, a chemical defense evolved by plants that causes pain receptors to fire. A student near Tobias made a retching sound. In essence, Zaltar concluded, humans are walking biohazards with adaptability that borders on the unnerving. Their bodies are battlegrounds of evolutionary warfare, yet they function normally amidst this constant biological conflict. Tobias felt his face grow warm. He'd never thought of himself as particularly special or dangerous. Back on Earth, he'd been just another college student trying to figure out his path in life. Before we proceed, Zaltar said, are there any Earth humans in this class who might offer some insights? The lecture hall fell silent. Dozens of pairs of eyes, some multifaceted, some bioluminescent, some barely recognizable as eyes at all. Turned toward Tobias. He hesitated, then slowly raised his hand. "Ah, yes," Zoltar said, sounding surprisingly delighted. "Tobias Harrow, correct? Our exchange student from Earth? Perhaps you could share your perspective?" Tobias cleared his throat. I never really thought of Earth as a death world. Professor, it's just home." "Precisely," Zoltar exclaimed. "The mark of a true death worlder, to find comfort in conditions others find terrifying. Tell me, Tobias, have you ever consumed capsaicin deliberately?" Tobias thought about the hot sauce collection in his dorm room. "Yes, Professor. Most humans enjoy spicy food." A wave of murmurs swept through the lecture hall. "And you've been exposed to pathogens, viruses, bacteria." "Of course," Tobias replied. "Everyone on Earth catches colds or stomach bugs occasionally." The student nearest to Tobias edged their seat away slightly. "Fascinating," Zoltar said. "Yet you appear completely normal. This is what makes Deathworlders so remarkable. Class. Their adaptations are often invisible until circumstances reveal them, or not. The rest of the lecture passed with Tobias feeling increasingly self-conscious. He'd come to the academy hoping to learn about the universe, not to become an exhibit in a xenobiology class. As students filed out after the lecture, Tobias found himself walking alone. The usual bubble of space around him seemed to have expanded. Even Nixara, a four-armed centaurian who'd been friendly since orientation, kept a noticeable distance. "Hey, Deathworlder," called a voice from behind. Tobias turned to see Vexilor, a draconian student with crimson scales and eyes like burning coals. "Heard the professor talking about you today." "He wasn't talking about me specifically." Tobias said, "No." Vexilor stepped closer, his greater height allowing him to look down at Tobias. "Tell me, human, is it true that your world has areas where the ground splits open and spews molten rock?" "Volcanoes, yes, but—" "And storms that hurl bolts of electricity?" "Lightning, yes. And you live there? Without protective technology?" Tobias shrugged. "We build structures to shelter us. But yes, we live there. Draconians come from a higher gravity world than Earth, don't they? With a methane atmosphere?" Vexilor's eyes narrowed. "My ancestors conquered their world. We bent it to our will with technology and genetic enhancement. We didn't simply endure it like you primitives." Before Tobias could respond, Nixara approached, though she still maintained a greater distance than usual. "The professor wants all students to sign up for the survival practicum," she said, her voice slightly higher pitched than normal. "It's being held on Proxima 9 next week." "Excellent," Vexilor said, his lipless mouth stretching into what might have been a smile. "Let's see how our Deathworlder friend performs outside his natural habitat." As Vexilor stalked away, Nixara hesitated, then asked in a lowered voice, "Is it true that humans deliberately expose themselves to solar radiation until their skin burns, for aesthetic reasons?" Tobias sighed. It was going to be a long semester. The days leading up to the survival practicum were uncomfortable for Tobias. In the academy's communal spaces, conversations would halt when he approached. In practical labs, partners would flinch if he came too close. Even the academy's AI system seemed to treat him differently, running additional decontamination protocols whenever he entered or exited his quarters. Professor Zoltar, on the other hand, had developed an almost uncomfortable fascination with him. After every class, the professor would approach with new questions about Earth or human biology. Tobias, Zoltar asked after one lecture, "Is it true that humans can regenerate their liver if portions are removed?" "Partially, yes," Tobias answered, trying to pack up his materials quickly. "Remarkable. And you mentioned you've broken bones before? Your skeletal system can self-repair fractures." "Yes, Professor, but so can many species, I'm sure. Not with the efficiency of humans," Zoltar said excitedly. "Most species require medical intervention, or at least a healing trance. Humans simply continue their daily activities while their bodies repair themselves. Extraordinary." The survival practicum was scheduled to last 3 days on Proxima 9, a planet the Academy used for field studies. It was classified as moderately habitable, with breathable air, tolerable gravity, and temperatures that wouldn't immediately kill most species. Still, it presented challenges: dense forests with potentially hazardous flora and fauna, unpredictable weather patterns, and terrain that ranged from swampy lowlands to rocky highlands. On the day of departure, Tobias boarded the Academy transport vessel along with 20 other students from various species. Most wore specialized environmental suits or carried advanced survival gear. Tobias had packed lightly: a basic filtration mask in case of airborne toxins, a multi-tool, water purification tablets, and a few emergency rations. "Attention, students," announced Dr. Ilara Voss, the survival instructor. She was human, one of the few other Earth natives at the Academy, though she'd lived off-world for decades. "This practicum will test your adaptability and problem-solving skills in an unfamiliar environment. You'll be divided into teams of 4 and dropped at different locations. Your objective is to navigate to the base camp within 3 planetary rotations, using only the resources available to you and minimal technology." The teams were assigned seemingly at random, though Tobias suspected Dr. Voss had deliberately placed him with Vexilor, Nixara, and Zixatal, the feathered student from xenobiology class. Perhaps she thought the tension would create an interesting dynamic. The transport touched down on Proxima 9's surface under a purple-tinged sky. The air smelled of vegetation and mineral deposits. Not unpleasant, but definitely alien. Each team was given coordinates for the base camp and a simple compass-like device that would point in the correct direction but provide no distance information or other guidance. "Remember," Dr. Voss said as the teams prepared to depart, "this is not a competition between teams. It's about learning to work together despite different biological needs and capabilities. Safety is the priority. If you encounter a situation beyond your ability to handle, activate your emergency beacon." Tobias's team was dropped in a region of dense, fern-like growth that reached above their heads. The plants had a bluish tinge and released spores that floated like motes of dust in the air. Vexilor and Zixatal immediately activated filters on their environmental suits. Nixara, whose species had evolved in spore-rich forests, seemed unbothered. "The base camp is approximately 40 kilometers in that direction," Vexilor said, checking their navigation device. "Over varied terrain, that will take at least 2 days of travel. We should establish a leadership hierarchy," Zixatal suggested, his feather crest rising slightly. "I propose Vexilor as team leader, given his experience with survival training." "Agreed," Nixara said quickly. No one suggested Tobias, which didn't surprise him. "First order of business," Vexilor declared. "Inventory of resources. What specialized equipment did everyone bring?" Zixatal had a portable analyzer for identifying edible vegetation Nixara carried a lightweight shelter that could accommodate all four of them. Vexilor had brought an impressive array of tools, including a plasma cutter that could slice through almost any material. When it came to Tobias, Vexilor looked skeptical. "That's all you brought? Basic Earth equipment?" "It's all I need," Tobias replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. "We'll see," Vexilor said. "Let's move out. Stay together and alert me to any potential hazards." They moved through the fern forest for several hours. The going was slow, as they had to push through the dense vegetation. Zixatal used his analyzer periodically to check for toxic spores or dangerous plants. Nixara, with her 4 arms, was particularly adept at clearing a path. Tobias noticed things the others missed: subtle signs of animal trails that could provide easier passage, changes in vegetation that indicated water sources, shifts in the wind that suggested weather changes. When he pointed these out, Vexilor initially dismissed his observations, but grudgingly began to follow his suggestions when they proved accurate. By mid-afternoon, they reached the edge of the forest. Before them stretched a vast plain covered in knee-high, grass-like plants with silvery tips that swayed in the breeze. The sky had darkened to a deep indigo, and clouds were gathering on the horizon. "We should cross the plain before that storm reaches us," Tobias suggested. Vexilor checked his atmospheric analyzer. "The storm is still hours away. We should rest here at the forest edge where we have shelter and continue when everyone is refreshed." "Those clouds are moving faster than you think," Tobias insisted. "And see how the grass is bending. The wind is picking up. Your primitive weather-predicting abilities might work on Earth," Vexilor said dismissively. "But this is Proxima 9. The atmospheric dynamics are completely different." "Actually," Nixara interjected, "my species has heightened sensitivity to barometric pressure. I think Tobias might be right. The pressure is dropping rapidly." Vexilor looked annoyed, but nodded. "Fine. We'll cross now. Stay close together." They set out across the plain. The grass-like plants released a sweet scent when crushed underfoot, and small insectoid creatures buzzed around them. Tobias noticed that the ground was becoming increasingly damp as they proceeded, eventually transitioning to a shallow marsh with water that reached their ankles. "This wasn't on the topographical scan," Vexilor said, frowning at his device. "The Academy probably gave us outdated information deliberately." Zixatal suggested, "Part of the challenge." They continued through the marsh, which gradually deepened. The storm was approaching faster than even Tobias had anticipated. The wind whipped the grass into a frenzy, and the first fat droplets of rain began to fall. "We need to find higher ground," Tobias called over the rising wind. "There," Nixara pointed with 2 of her arms. "Rocks ahead." They quickened their pace, but the marsh became treacherous. The bottom was uneven, with hidden holes and submerged obstacles. The rain intensified, reducing visibility. Suddenly, Zixatal let out a cry. He had stepped into a deeper section, and water now reached his chest. "Help!" he called, his feathers becoming waterlogged. "I can't swim." Vexilor and Nixara reached for him, but they too were struggling in the deepening water. Without hesitation, Tobias plunged forward. Earth's higher gravity had made him a strong swimmer. And he reached Zixatal quickly, supporting the panicking student. He guided him toward the rocky outcropping Nixara had spotted. By the time they all reached the relative safety of the rocks, the storm had become a full-blown tempest. Rain lashed at them, and lightning cracked across the sky. "We need shelter," Tobias shouted over the storm. The portable shelter won't withstand these winds. Nixara said. Tobias scanned the rocks and spotted a crevice that widened into what might be a small cave. There! They scrambled to the opening, which indeed led to a shallow cave just large enough for the four of them. They huddled inside, dripping wet and shivering, except for Vexilor, whose draconian metabolism kept him naturally warm. "Everyone okay?" Tobias asked. Zixatal was trembling, his feathers plastered to his body. My species isn't adapted to cold or wet conditions. Our body temperature drops rapidly." Without a word, Tobias removed his jacket, now wet but still offering some insulation, and wrapped it around Zixatal. "What about you?" Nixiara asked. "I'll be fine," Tobias assured her. "Humans are endothermic. We generate our own heat, and we're adapted to temperature variations." Vexilor was watching him with an unreadable expression. "You swam efficiently. I thought Earth was mostly land." "It's about 70% water," Tobias said. "Most humans learn to swim early. It's considered a basic survival skill." "And you gave away your thermal protection without hesitation," Vexilor observed. Tobias shrugged. Zixatal needed it more than I did. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Eventually, Nixara spoke. "In xenobiology class, Professor Zaltar mentioned that humans are highly social organisms, that you form strong bonds with even non-related individuals." "That's true," Tobias agreed. "Is that why you helped Zixatal without hesitation? Because of social bonding?" Tobias considered the question. "Partly, but it's also about survival. Humans evolved as group animals. We learned early in our development that we survive better together than alone. Yet, you're here, alone, far from your homeworld." Vexilor pointed out. "Not really alone." Tobias said, "I'm with all of you." The storm continued through the night. They took turns keeping watch, though there was little to see beyond the cave entrance where rain continued to pour down. Tobias used the time to assess their situation. They had lost valuable travel time. And while the cave provided shelter, they would need to move on once the storm abated. Morning brought clearing skies, but a transformed landscape. The marsh had become a lake, with only the tops of the taller vegetation visible above the water's surface. Their planned route was now submerged. "We'll have to go around," Vexilor said, studying their navigation device. "It will add hours to our journey. Or we could build a raft," Tobias suggested. The others looked at him doubtfully. "The forest we passed through yesterday had plenty of fallen vegetation that would float," Tobias explained. "We could lash pieces together using strips of the outer bark. It wouldn't be elegant, but it would get us across." "And how do you propose to propel this primitive craft?" Vexilor asked. "We can use branches as poles in the shallower sections. In deeper water, we can fashion paddles." To Tobias's surprise, Vexilor nodded. "It's more efficient than going around. Let's try it." They returned to the forest edge and spent several hours gathering materials and constructing a simple raft under Tobias's direction. His experience from childhood summers at a lake came in handy. He'd built similar rafts for fun, though never out of alien vegetation. The finished craft was crude but functional. They launched it into the newly formed lake and boarded carefully. As Tobias had suggested, they used long branches to pole through the shallower areas. When they reached deeper water, improvised paddles kept them moving. "This is actually working," Zixatal said, sounding surprised. "Primitive doesn't always mean ineffective." Tobias replied with a smile. They made good progress across the lake. On the far side, they found themselves at the foot of a range of hills that rose toward a plateau. According to their navigation device, the base camp lay on the other side of the plateau. "We should reach it by nightfall if we maintain a steady pace," Vexilor said. As they began their ascent, Tobias noticed a change in the team dynamic. The others no longer kept their distance from him. Instead, they asked questions about Earth and human adaptations with genuine curiosity rather than disgust or fear. "Is it true that humans can go days without sleep?" Nyxara asked as they climbed. "We can," Tobias confirmed, "though it's not pleasant, and it affects cognitive function. After about 48 hours without sleep, hallucinations can begin." "Yet you do this." "For entertainment?" Zixatal asked incredulously. Tobias laughed. "Not usually. But yes, some humans push their limits voluntarily. Vision quests, endurance challenges, extreme sports. Fascinating." Zixatal murmured. "My species requires 12 hours of sleep per day. Any less, and our neural pathways begin to degrade." The climb became steeper as they approached the plateau. The terrain was rocky, with loose scree that shifted underfoot. Vexilor, with his superior strength and natural climbing abilities, took the lead. Zixatal, whose light bones made him more buoyant, struggled less than expected. Nyxara's 4 arms gave her excellent stability. Tobias found the climb challenging, but not beyond his capabilities. Earth's higher gravity had given him strength that served him well here. When Nyxara slipped on a particularly treacherous section, Tobias caught her with a reaction speed that surprised even him. "Your reflexes are impressive," she said, regaining her footing. "Adrenaline," Tobias explained. "It's a hormone that increases heart rate, blood pressure, and energy supplies in response to stress or danger. It also enhances reaction time. Your body produces this naturally, without technological assistance." "Yes, it's part of our fight-or-flight response, an evolutionary adaptation." They reached the plateau by mid-afternoon. From their elevated position, they could see the base camp in the distance, a collection of domed structures nestled in a valley on the other side of the plateau. "We're ahead of schedule," Vexilor noted, sounding almost approving. The plateau was covered in short, stubby vegetation and dotted with boulders. As they made their way across, Tobias felt a tremor through the soles of his feet. "Did you feel that?" he asked. The others shook their heads. Another tremor, stronger this time. Tobias dropped to one knee and placed his palm flat against the ground. "Something's coming," he said. "Something big." "The sensors aren't detecting any large life forms," Zixatal said, checking his device. "Trust me," Tobias insisted. "We need to take cover, now." They barely had time to duck behind a cluster of boulders before the ground erupted 20 meters away. A massive creature burst forth, segmented, with a chitinous exoskeleton and multiple limbs ending in wicked-looking appendages that were part claw, part drill. Proximan burrower. Vexilor hissed. Highly territorial and nearly blind, it hunts by sensing vibrations. The creature swiveled what appeared to be a head, though it had no visible eyes. Instead, it had clusters of sensory organs that quivered as it sought the source of the disturbance it had detected. "Nobody move," Vexilor whispered. "It will lose interest if it doesn't sense movement." They remained frozen behind their boulder. The burrower continued to search, its massive form casting a shadow over the plateau. Then, a small rock, dislodged by their hasty hiding, rolled down, and clinked against another stone. The burrower's head snapped toward the sound. It began moving in their direction, its drill-like limbs rotating with an ominous whirring sound. "It's coming this way," Nixara whispered, her voice tight with fear. "We need a distraction," Tobias said quietly. "Something to draw it away." "Like what?" Zixatal asked. Tobias looked around and spotted a larger boulder about 50 meters away. "If we could create a significant vibration over there, it might investigate that instead." "And how do we do that without being detected?" Vexilor asked. Tobias reached for his multi-tool. "Does anyone have something we could throw? Something heavy enough to make an impact?" Nixara produced a dense metal component from her pack. "Part of my shelter assembly. Will this work?" Tobias nodded. "Perfect. I'll throw it. When the burrower moves toward the sound, we run in the opposite direction. Stay on the rocks as much as possible to minimize vibrations." "You're assuming you can throw it far enough," Vexilor said skeptically. "Trust me," Tobias replied. He took the metal piece, tested its weight, and prepared to throw. "Get ready to move," with a fluid motion that belied his average appearance. Tobias hurled the metal piece with surprising force. It sailed through the air and struck the distant boulder with a loud clang that echoed across the plateau. The burrower immediately turned and charged toward the sound. As soon as it was moving away, Tobias signaled to the others. "Now, stay on the rocks." They scrambled from their hiding place, leaping from boulder to boulder to avoid touching the ground as much as possible. The burrower, reaching the source of the sound and finding nothing, began to circle in confusion. The team had nearly reached the edge of the plateau when Zixatal misjudged a jump. He landed heavily on open ground, sending vibrations through the soil. The burrower whirled and charged. "Run!" Vexilor shouted. They sprinted for the edge of the plateau, where a steep but manageable slope led down toward the base camp. The burrower was gaining rapidly, its multiple legs carrying it with surprising speed. Just as they reached the edge, the creature lunged. One of its drill limbs caught Nixara's pack, tearing it away. She stumbled and would have fallen if Tobias hadn't grabbed her with one hand while anchoring himself to a protruding rock with the other. The sudden stop sent pain shooting through Tobias's shoulder. But he held firm, with a strength that surprised even him. He pulled Nixara to safety while Vexilor and Zixatal prepared to defend against the burrower. But the creature, having reached the edge of the plateau, stopped. It seemed reluctant to venture onto the slope. After a moment of indecision, it turned and burrowed back into the ground, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. "It doesn't like unstable terrain," Vexilor observed. The slope was too uncertain for it. They paused to catch their breath. Nixara turned to Tobias. "You saved me, again." Tobias rotated his shoulder, wincing slightly. "You'd have done the same." "That throw," Zixatal said, "and that catch. Your strength and accuracy are far beyond what your physiology suggests. Earth's gravity is about 15% higher than galactic standard." Tobias explained. "I'm used to exerting more force just to move around. Here, that translates to what seems like enhanced strength. And your reaction to danger," Vexilor added. "You didn't freeze or panic. You assessed, planned, and acted." Tobias shrugged. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters. We're wired to think under pressure." They made their way down the slope and across the final stretch to the base camp. Dr. Voss greeted them with raised eyebrows. "Team 4, you're the first to arrive. and a full day ahead of schedule. Impressive. They were shown to a communal shelter where they could rest and clean up. Food appropriate for each species' biology was provided. And they ate together, recounting their journey to Dr. Voss. When they described the encounter with the burrower, Voss looked startled. The area was supposed to be cleared of dangerous megafauna. That shouldn't have happened. It's fine, Vexlor said, surprising everyone. We handled it. Thanks to Tobias, Nixiara added. Dr. Voss studied Tobias with newfound interest. Tell me exactly what happened. As Tobias described their escape, emphasizing the team effort rather than his own actions. Voss nodded thoughtfully. When he finished, she said, You exhibited classic Deathworlder responses: threat detection, rapid assessment, decisive action, physical capabilities beyond baseline expectations. Exactly what Professor Zalter has been lecturing about. Tobias felt his face grow warm. I just did what anyone would do. No, Vexlor said firmly. You did what a Deathworlder would do. What a human would do. Over the next 2 days, the other teams arrived at the base camp. Some had faced challenges similar to Tobias's team, while others had encountered different obstacles. None had arrived as quickly or as efficiently on the return journey to the academy. Tobias found himself the center of attention, not as a curiosity or a potential biohazard, but as someone with valuable insights and abilities. Students who had previously avoided him now sought his company, asking questions about Earth and human adaptations. Professor Zaltar was ecstatic when they returned. I heard about your performance on Proxima 9, he told Tobias after class. A perfect demonstration of Deathworlder capabilities in action. Would you consider allowing me to run some non-invasive scans? For research purposes, of course. Tobias politely declined, but agreed to be interviewed about his experiences. The most significant change, however, was in his immediate circle. Vexlor, who had initially treated him with contempt, now acknowledged him with respect. Nixara no longer kept her distance, instead seeking him out for study sessions and social activities. Zixatal had become almost reverential, constantly taking notes whenever Tobias explained anything about human biology or Earth culture. One evening, as Tobias sat in the Academy's communal garden enjoying the artificial sunset, Vexlor approached and sat beside him. I misjudged you, the Draconian said without preamble. It's okay, Tobias replied. I'm used to it. That's the point, Vexlor said. You shouldn't have to be used to it. My people pride themselves on being from a harsh world, on having conquered extreme conditions through technology and biological adaptation. We look down on species from more temperate worlds as weak, untested. He paused, his burning eyes fixed on the horizon. But your world, Earth, it's different. You didn't conquer your environment with technology. You adapted to it naturally. You evolved alongside it, becoming part of it rather than its master. We use technology too, Tobias pointed out. Yes, but not as a crutch, not as a replacement for natural adaptation. That's what impressed me. When our technology failed us on Proxima 9, you fell back on instinct, on natural abilities honed over millions of years of evolution. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. The Academy is holding an interspecies cultural exchange next month, Vexlor said finally. Would you consider presenting information about Earth? I think many students would benefit from learning more about your world directly, rather than through xenobiology lectures that treat humans as curiosities. Tobias smiled. I'd like that. Word spread quickly about Tobias's planned presentation. Students who had never spoken to him before approached with questions or offers to help. Professor Zaltar provided access to the Academy's database of Earth information, much of which Tobias found amusingly inaccurate. On the day of the cultural exchange, the lecture hall was packed. Beings of all shapes, sizes, and compositions crowded in, some requiring special accommodations for their biology. At the appointed time, Tobias stepped onto the stage, feeling a flutter of nervousness. "Good afternoon," he began. "My name is Tobias Harrow, and I'm from Earth, what many of you know as Sol 3, classified in galactic records as a Class X Deathworld." He activated the holographic display, showing a rotating image of Earth. But to me and billions of other humans, it's simply home. Not a death trap, not a proving ground, just home. For the next hour, Tobias presented a different view of Earth than the one Professor Zaltar had given. Yes, he acknowledged the environmental extremes, the biological hazards, the evolutionary pressures that had shaped human biology. But he also showed the beauty, the diverse ecosystems, the cultural richness, the art and music and literature that had flourished despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges. He talked about human resilience, not as a terrifying adaptation, but as a source of hope and creativity. He explained how facing adversity had taught humans empathy, how overcoming obstacles had fostered innovation, how living on a challenging world had instilled a deep appreciation for life in all its forms. When he finished, the audience was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, they began to applaud, some clapping hands, others thumping appendages, some creating sounds that weren't applause at all, but were clearly meant as appreciation. Professor Zaltar approached the stage, his bioluminescent veins pulsing with excitement. A fascinating perspective. "Tobias, you've given us much to consider. Perhaps our classification of death worlds needs revisiting. Perhaps what makes a world deadly is not objective conditions, but subjective experience." As the crowd dispersed, Nixara, Zixatal, and Vexilor waited for Tobias. "That was illuminating," Nixara said. "I never considered that what seems hostile to one species might be nurturing to another." "Indeed," Zixatal agreed. "The concept of evolutionary context is rarely discussed in xenobiology." Vexilor simply nodded, but his burning eyes held a new respect. As they walked together toward the Academy's dining hall, Tobias reflected on how much had changed. He had arrived as an outsider, a curiosity, a potential threat. Now, he was still different, still a death worlder among beings from more hospitable planets. But that difference was no longer a barrier. It was a bridge. They taught the class about death world monsters, unaware one was in the room. But the monster turned out to be not a creature of nightmares, but a being of resilience, adaptability, and compassion. Not a threat, but an ally. Not an alien, but a friend. In the grand cosmic scheme, perhaps that was the greatest adaptation of all.